What is happening, YouTube? Welcome back, guys, to another episode on Mob Talk UK. First of all, I just want to give a big shout out to all the current subscribers on the channel. If you have subscribed to the channel so far, much love and respect to you all, guys. I really do appreciate it. So thanks for jumping on board. This is for you guys. In this latest episode, we're going to be talking about the Wild West shooting at Salford's Brass Handles pub that happened in 2006. Now, this was a shooting in Salford which at the time sent absolute shockwaves through the underworld of Manchester's Gangland. So let's dive right in. More than 20 years ago, a Wild West style shootout in Salford's Brass Handles pub, which left two would-be assassins dead, as I said, sent shockwaves through Greater Manchester's criminal fraternity. And this is an infamous incident which is still very much talked about and remembered to this day amongst people connected to Manchester's gangland scene. Two young gang members from Moss Side, Carlton Alvaranga, 20 years old, and Richard Austin, 19 years old, were the hired guns that day who had been sent, more forced, basically. They were sent on this day into one of the city's toughest pubs, the Brass Handles, to shoot dead a young upstart gangster that these lads didn't even know. Basically, these two young wannabe hitmen, or would-be hitmen, should I say, were basically on this day lambs sent to their own slaughter. Moments after these two young lads burst into the Brass Handles pub, where regulars were watching Manchester United beating Newcastle on a extremely busy Sunday lunchtime on March the 12th, 2006, they were disarmed and shot dead with their own guns. They were fatally injured. The would-be hitmen staggered out of the pub onto a grass verge that was just outside beside Fitzwarren Street, where both the lads collapsed and died. In a trademark Salford gangland move following any crime inside a pub, someone ripped out the CCTV system. And then the word went out, this is Salford and no one speaks to the law. No one inside the pub that day, and there were hundreds of people, would ever speak to the police about the shooting which occurred. To this day, no one has ever been brought to justice for the killing of Alvaranga and Austin, who were to be believed to be in the debt to the Moss Side gang boss who actually organised the hit. So let's dive into the details surrounding this incident and the old backstory. The man that was believed to be behind the hit in organising it was Ian McLeod, who was a founder member of the notorious Doddington crew, who had sent these two young men to what turned out to be their own deaths. McLeod had parked up close to the pub in his Ford Mondeo. As his hired guns lay mortally wounded, his mind was still on the intended targets. He was heard to ask, "Are they dead yet?" He walked onto the grass verge to check his charges were dead before calmly driving away. At first, detectives thought the shooting was the result of a feud between rival gangs in Salford and Moss Side. Over the weeks and months of the subsequent police investigation, seasoned detectives were shocked when they uncovered the truth. This crime was made in Salford, despite it appearing otherwise. McLeod was then 43 years old and all but retired from serious crime, but he was still very much regarded as being the leader of the Doddington gang. He had himself been hired by one of Salford's most notorious figures of the time, Bobby Spears, who was a close friend of the city's Mr. Big, Paul Massey, who would himself be shot dead years later. Bobby Spears is said to have paid Ian McLeod £10,000 for the hit. Not that the young men who would carry out the dirty work were ever going to see any of that money. At the moment Alvaranga and Austin were walking into the Brass Handles pub, Bobby Spears was enjoying a half-time pint in an executive box at Old Trafford, where he was watching his beloved Manchester United beating Newcastle 2-0. It was, he must have thought, the perfect alibi for the perfect crime. But the mission failed, and Bobby Spears fled to Benidorm in Spain, believing he would never be unmasked as the man who had ordered the hit. The man that he actually wanted dead that day was Salford hardman David Totten, whose burgeoning criminal reputation and liking for violence demanded attention from his rivals. Now, it's never been too clear exactly why Bobby Spears wanted David Totten dead so badly. There's been a lot of rumours over the years, a lot of different stories floating about, but neither man has ever gone public to explain how their feud actually began. But one thing that I have always heard from a few different people over years is that in the weeks or maybe months before the shooting, Totten was refused entry to a Manchester nightclub, and he told the bouncers that he was a friend of Bobby Spears, who was already inside the club at the time. The doorman fetched Bobby Spears to the entrance, and even though he perfectly knew who Totten was, Spears feigned ignorance. The doorman sent humiliated Totten on his way, basically. It's unclear whether this was meant simply as a laddish joke or something designed to belittle Totten. Whatever the intention, in the subsequent weeks, David Totten suddenly started drinking in Bobby Spears' local, the Brass Handles. Now, was this designed to spook Bobby Spears? If that was the case, it worked because Spears was worried, and he started quietly setting about a plot to assassinate David Totten. So after that, the plot was hatched. Two hired young guys from Moss Side would be sent into a pub in the city of Salford's heartland to kill Totten as he watched the match. Police would believe it was a feud between rivals in Moss Side and Salford, and Spears would go under the radar. That was the original plan, that was the intention. They were to be ousted by a spotter placed inside the pub, convicted gunrunner Connie Howarth. She sent discreet messages from inside the Brass Handles to tell McLeod whereabouts David Totten was sitting with his mates in the snooker room, information he could then pass on to his reluctant hitmen. She was sitting at the bar, mobile phone in hand, and had a view across the bar to the snooker room where Totten and all his mates were sat. It seems the hired would-be assassins were very reluctant. Evidence suggested that Ian McLeod had to force the two young men from his car so that they could go and complete their mission. Detectives believed at the time that Austin and Oliver Ranga were only in the car because of a debt they owed McLeod. The young men weren't believed to be there to make a pile of cash, but simply get Ian McLeod off their backs. When the two young lads entered the pub, they fired 6 times into Totten's chest before Austin's gun misfired, and they were eventually overpowered by other drinkers. Totten, who was with a large group of mates, was seriously hurt, but incredibly, he survived. Another man, not believed to be a target, Aaron Travers, was also hit, jumping up and taking 2 bullets meant for his friend Totten. The table at which Totten and all his friends had been sitting and drinking was upended and used as a shield against the Doddington gang members who had run into the pub, opening fire. Totten and Travers were then driven away and dumped outside a hospital, where they were treated and will make full recoveries despite extremely serious injuries. Neither men would make a formal statement to the police about being shot, and nor would anyone else who was in the pub that afternoon. This was Salford's a murder at work, the most impenetrable code of silence which protects the city's criminals from prosecution. It means almost 20 years later, after Austin and Alvaranga were shot dead, no one has ever been charged over the killings. For many outside Greater Manchester's criminal fraternity, their loss isn't mourned. I mean, after all, they were going in there about to murder someone else in cold blood before they themselves were disarmed and shot. So not many people on the outside looking in were ever going to feel too sorry for these two young lads, basically. The shooting at the Brass Handles and its main protagonists have helped to shape the criminal landscape that exists in Greater Manchester today. The target of the hit that day, David Totten, went on to become one of the most feared men in Salford, someone who has had repeated run-ins with the law ever since. Now, the law did eventually catch up with Ian McLeod and Bobby Spears, but no thanks to anyone inside the Brass Handles pub that day. The following year after the shootings, Connie Howarth, who was acting as the spotter inside the pub, was jailed for a minimum of 20 years, while Ian McLeod, the Doddington gang leader who organised the hit, he was handed a minimum of 21 years as part of their life sentences. This was a major coup for Greater Manchester Police, which had routinely struggled to penetrate Salford's criminal underworld. Meanwhile, Bobby Spears was living the high life and enjoying the sunshine in Benidorm. He used to regularly go out to watch his beloved Manchester United whenever they played, and whenever he did go out to watch the football, police always kept a close eye on him. But at this point, they couldn't do anything for now. Bobby Spears had been instrumental in planning the operation and kept in touch with McLeod and Haworth on his mobile phone from his executive box, Old Trafford. Communication police would later uncover, unmasking him as the man who had ordered the botched hit. Finally, Bobby Spears was extradited back to the UK after a European arrest warrant was issued, and he was jailed for a minimum of 23 years in 2009. His close friend Paul Massey, the man regarded as Salford's Mr. Big, who was himself shot dead later on in 2015, was once pictured spray painting "Free Bobby Spears" on the walls outside the Salford's Lads Club in the city in the wake of the sentencing of his mate. For a period in 2009, police investigating Austin and Alvarenga's deaths were keen to speak to a suspected robber who had been in the brass handles that day before going on the run, but nothing has ever come from that particular line of inquiry. Now, David Totten may have survived the shooting that day, but he has continued to have numerous run-ins with Greater Manchester Police ever since. Police did not believe he was the man who had actually shot dead Austin and Alvarenga, but he certainly didn't tell the police who did do it. In 2011, he was handed 20 months behind bars after he admitted conspiracy to handle stolen goods. Before that, he served a long prison sentence for beating up 2 car park attendants. Who can blame him for that, really, realistically? His computer log at GMP has a firearms marker on it by virtue of surviving the brass handle shooting. On March the 3rd, 2012, he was in the middle of another shooting, and this time it was the police doing the firing. He was sitting in the front passenger seat of a stolen red Audi A6 estate parked in Coulterth in Cheshire when armed police swooped on the car and shot dead the driver, who was his mate, Anthony Granger. Again, David Totten survived this incident. A public inquiry later heard that Totten had been gloved and wearing a rolled-up balaclava on his head. In the back of the car was Joey Travers, the brother of the man who had taken a couple of bullets for Totten, Aaron Travers. At the public inquiry into the death of Anthony Granger, Totten denied he was about to commit a robbery at a nearby supermarket and claimed that they were simply there to collect a debt from a man called Fenton. He and many others were defined by that shooting at the Brass Handles in 2006 and the subsequent police investigation. It was a remarkable case, and hopefully we won't go back to those bad times ever again. They were just young lads, really. It was such a tragedy. This was said by Andy Tattersall, who is the now retired detective superintendent who led the original investigation. Today, the file remains open on the murders of Colton Alvarenga and Richard Austin, but just don't expect anyone in Salford to ever tell you about it. So there we have it, guys. That is the story of the infamous shooting at the Brass Handles pub in Salford, which happened in 2006, which left 2 young gang members dead. The Doddington gang leader Ian McLeod serving a life sentence, as well as Salford's notorious gangster Bobby Spears also serving a very lengthy time behind bars. I hope you enjoyed this latest episode on Mob Talk UK. Drop us a like, drop us a comment. Let's get a good discussion talking about this particular case. If you haven't subscribed to the channel already, then please do so. Jump on board. And until next time, guys, as always, be safe, look after yourselves, and I will see you again very soon for another episode on Mob Talk UK. Thanks for listening, guys. Take care.